Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, Taiwan has requested to attend the UN General Assembly this year. This bears extra weight to world leaders. Taiwan is one of the few nations successfully dealing with the current health crisis, while the Chinese regime has been criticized by many countries for covering up information in the early stages of the pandemic. Under political pressure from China, the international organization is likely to exclude Taiwan again from attending the General Assembly, which will be held from September 15th to 30th in New York, United States. The Chinese regime considers Taiwan part of its territory, despite the fact that the island operates as a de facto state, with its own democratically elected government, military, and currency. Beijing has continually pressured international organizations, such as the United States, to accept China's sovereignty claims. In his recently penned commentary published in several Asian newspapers, Taiwan's Foreign Minister Zhao Xie Joseph Wu wrote, 23.5 million people of Taiwan are denied any access to UN premises. Taiwanese journalists and media outlets are also denied accreditation to cover UN meetings. To commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, the theme for this year's assembly will be The Future We Want, the UN We Need, reaffirming our collective commitment to multilateralism. Taiwan has not been a part of the UN since October 1971. Due to COVID-19, the UN Assembly this year will be held virtually for the first time. Diplomats joining the event will be reminded every day of the ongoing pandemic due to the new norm of a virtual meeting environment. With its high population density, Taiwan has managed to have less than 500 confirmed cases and 7 deaths since the start of COVID-19, while around the world there have been over 27 million infected and more than 893,000 deaths. Experts have attributed Taiwan's success in curbing the spread of the virus to its early preventive measures, which largely came from its past experience of dealing with epidemics originating from China. Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen was head of the Mainland Affairs Council, the island's agency for managing relations with mainland China, during the SARS Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome pandemic in 2003. SARS caused 180 deaths in Taiwan. Based on its past experience, Taiwan's Disease Control Agency, DCA, sent 2 health experts to Wuhan on January 11th, upon learning about the city's mysterious pneumonia-like illness that broke out late last year. On January 16th, DCA held its first news conference to address the potential health risk that originated from Wuhan, then quickly established border control measures and a new Central Epidemic Command Center dealing with the novel coronavirus. Meanwhile, other nations have largely relied on information from the World Health Organization. On January 28th, WHO's Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus visited Beijing and met Chinese leader Xi Jinping 5 days after the lockdown of Wuhan. However, WHO did not declare COVID-19 as a pandemic until March 11th. Taiwan's success in protecting the island nation from the pandemic has caught the world's attention. In August, U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar visited Taiwan to discuss strategies in containing COVID-19, becoming the highest-level U.S. official to visit the island since 1979. Taiwan has also been making efforts to assist other nations. Wu said in his commentary, Taiwan had donated 51 million surgical masks, 1.16 million N95 masks, 600,000 isolation gowns, 35,000 forehead thermometers, and other medical materials to more than 80 countries. Under its 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the UN pledges that no one will be left behind, and that because the dignity of the human person is fundamental, we wish to see the goals and targets met for all nations and peoples for all segments of society. Wu asserted that the UN is working against its own vision. When Taiwan, one of the world's model democracies and a success story in containing the current pandemic, continues to be barred from taking part in and exchanging experiences and information with the UN system. In May, Taiwan was excluded from an annual meeting of the World Health Assembly, the decision-making body of the WHO, despite its success in containing the pandemic. Since 2017, Taiwan has been barred by China from taking part in the assembly and its meetings. Wu emphasized in his commentary, the global community must make a concerted effort to forge the better and more sustainable future. Taiwan is ready, willing, and able to be a part of these efforts.
Beijing has cultivated relationships with overseas Chinese language media via major global conferences headlined by Communist Party leaders. Experts say it is part of the CCP's broader United Front work. The revelations come after 4 Chinese nationals and journalists were denied re-entry into Australia following allegations they engaged in espionage or foreign interference. Since 2013, 92 Chinese language media outlets from Australia have taken part in the Global Chinese Language Media Forum. The conference is backed by major Chinese Communist Party organs, including the Information Office of the State Council, Beijing's internet censorship arm, China News Service, the second largest state-run media in the country, and the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office, which has been accused of influence activities. The latter two fall under the control of the United Front Work Department, who also headlined the event, boasting thousands of Chinese language media from overseas. Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan are a unique force of public opinion, playing an important and unique role in spreading the Chinese voice. Best known for spearheading overseas Chinese influence operations, the UFWD gained notoriety in Australia with its connection to controversial billionaire Huang Xiaomo and the downfall of former Labour Senator Sam Dastyari. At the most recent event in Shijiazhuang in 2019, the forum featured high-ranking CCP leaders, Shen Yueyue, the vice chairwoman of the National People's Congress, deputy ministers of the UFWD, Tan Tianxing and Xu Yousheng. Xu is also director of the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office, Guo Weimin, deputy director of the Information Office of the State Council, and Wang Dongfeng, secretary of the Hebei Provincial Party Committee. Attendees are encouraged to promote cooperation between the world and China to tell China's story well. Recently, a sentiment echoed by ABC News director Gavin Morris, who said, "The story of China, its relationship with Australia, and its role in our region and in the world is one of great importance for all Australians." His comments followed the recent withdrawal of 2 Australian correspondents from China due to safety concerns. In 2019, 427 delegates from 61 different countries attended, including delegates from as far as the United Kingdom, Venezuela, Egypt, and Madagascar. Australia sent the third largest delegation, 37 individuals, following the United States, 63, and Canada, 51. The list of delegates reveals media proprietors and managers from Australian capital cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Canberra, and Perth. The attendees represent a wide swath of media, including those with direct links to Beijing, some long-standing Chinese community titles, and 3 attendees from Australia's public broadcasters, SBS and ABC. Independent Chinese language media such as the Epoch Times Chinese edition and Vision Times are not invited. The Hoover Institute in California has called the conference nothing more than a platform for Beijing to influence overseas Chinese language media, to promote the party line and cultivate self-censorship in overseas Chinese language news media outlets. During the forum's founding, Guo Jiaojin, former president of China News Service, said a key goal of the event was to persuade overseas media to use materials sourced from China News Service, rather than from competing independent sources in Taiwan or Western countries. The Hoover report stated, essays released during the conferences praised the censorship of views opposed by the party and stressed the necessity of, in the words of One Piece in 2015, properly telling China's story. On August 28th, Acting Immigration Minister Alan Tudge warned of foreign actors seeking to grow division in Australia and sow distrust in the government and institutions. Tudge was particularly concerned about the reach of foreign actors in multicultural communities and warned that malign information or propaganda could be spreading through ethnic media, including outlets controlled or funded by state players. Community members with poor English language skills were considered highly vulnerable. Dr. Jin Qin, chair of the Federation for a Democratic China, concurred, saying many overseas Chinese language media have been infiltrated or are under the influence of Beijing. He told the Epoch Times, staff of the media are either driven by the economic power of the Chinese Communist Party or influenced by so-called national pride. And he added, some Chinese language media funded by the Australian government appear to uphold Australian values, but in reality they endorse Beijing. For example, during the height of the Hong Kong pro-democracy rallies last year, a Sydney-based Chinese news website, a regular attendee of the Global Chinese Language Media Forum, published a statement on August 21st condemning the radical demonstrators for escalating violence against police and stated that Hong Kong belonged to the Chinese nation. Another news outlet in Melbourne this year defended Beijing's handling of the COVID-19 outbreak in response to a series of Facebook posts made by Bernie Finn, a Victorian state member of parliament, in March that criticized the Chinese regime. The outlet went on to call his posts a great insult to the Chinese people and said Finn's actions exposed his paranoia, ignorance, and hatred towards China. Their actions stand in contrast to the experiences of independent Chinese language media operators like Dr. Bin Lin, who received a letter in 2010 warning him not to mention the Tiananmen Square massacre on his radio program again and threatening him with assassination. The Chinese Communist Party has stepped up its efforts to persecute Falun Gong, even as the country faces challenges from the pandemic, floods, economic downturn, food shortage crisis, and deteriorating international relations. Recently, the Epoch Times obtained internal documents from various local governments that reveal the persecution of Falun Gong is linked to local officials' performance and also has been integrated into the CCP's various political campaigns, including anti-pornography, safety construction, and village revitalization. Even in the regime's policies for pandemic control and prevention, there is content related to suppressing Falun Gong.
Facing so many disasters and this pandemic, the biggest concern should be the huge loss of lives and property. Yet the CCP's governments at all levels pretends to be deaf and dumb, just simply ignoring those things. What it wants to do is to create an atmosphere to divert people's attention and play political games. The persecution of Falun Gong is what it can still play.
According to a confidential document issued by the Organization Department of the Fuyang Municipal Party Committee of Anhui Province, the degree of suppressing Falun Gong is used as an indicator for assessing the performance of Communist Party members in the province.
I'm in the CCP's system. I know that the CCP's consistent method of controlling their subordinate bureaucracies is through intimidation and bribery. It uses this method to control all the officials, using those indicators to assess their performance and tie them to their personal promotions, bonuses, and benefits, etc., is meant to coerce them into doing evil.
The Organization Department of Fuyang Municipal Party Committee of Anhui forwarded a document to local committees titled 2019 Provincial City Leadership Development Assessment Indicators and Scoring Criteria. According to the document, the most important task for determining performance criteria is sweeping criminals and evils. This pertains to the persecution campaign to eradicate Falun Gong, which includes forcing adherents to give up the practice and the management and control of key personnel during sensitive periods and major events. According to a report from Minghui.org, a U.S.-based website that provides first-hand updates on the spiritual practice and its persecution, Falun Gong adherents have been the target of local police carrying out orders of sweeping gangs and evils. Harassing, arresting, and condemning Falun Gong practitioners is rewarded with political gains. Even prisoners in the detention centers said, arresting these good people is their so-called sweeping and eliminating evils.
We all know that Anhui is a flood discharge area. A lot of local people are seriously affected. The Anhui government did not have any effective measures to help these people cope with such a huge disaster. Instead, it introduced these policies to continue to suppress Falun Gong. You can see how shameless the local officials act for their personal benefit.
Another document obtained by the Epoch Times reveals that the persecution of Falun Gong is a major and daily task for local officials in Guye district in Tangshan City, Hubei province. The document shows a table that breaks down the tasks among authorities that are aimed at increasing the pressure on Falun Gong. Specific tasks are assigned to district-level subcontracting leaders, responsible units, section-level subcontracting leaders, and participating personnel in various towns and neighborhoods. The Epoch Times also obtained internal documents from local authorities in Xinjiang that detail the persecution of Falun Gong in the region. Among them, 2 documents from Huacheng County of Yili included the suppression of Falun Gong as one of their main tasks. Mainland human rights lawyers Xie Yanyi and Xie Yang pointed out in an open letter to the European Union, today the biggest human rights issue is in China, and China's biggest human rights issue is the issue of Falun Gong. They said, with Falun Gong treated with injustice, the country is in danger.
The CCP has put all powers of the whole country to suppress it, Falun Gong, for more than 20 years, but it has not disappeared. It is a faith group that did not succumb. These Falun Gong practitioners have continuously exposed the true nature of the CCP cult to Chinese people at home and abroad during these years. Now over 360 million Chinese people have withdrawn from the Chinese Communist Party and its affiliated organizations, despite the severe persecution of Falun Gong. The Enlightenment movement from Falun Gong practitioners is what the CCP really fears.
Liu also said that the CCP is heading toward destruction as it continues to persecute Falun Gong.
On September 9th, U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo issued a statement criticizing the People's Daily, the main propaganda newspaper of the Chinese Communist Party, for refusing to run an op-ed by the U.S. ambassador to China, Terry Branstad, exposing the CCP's fear of free speech. This article by Branstad calls on China and the United States to build a more positive bilateral relationship through uncensored discussions and unrestricted interaction. The article mentioned that the CCP has urged us to focus on areas of cooperation while setting aside our differences, and for years, the United States had agreed to do that approach in the expectation that over time we would address our concerns as well. But the Chinese leadership has exploited this approach. Often, it has insisted we sweep differences under the table as a prerequisite for engagement. Sometimes, it made promises to address our concerns, yet failed to follow up. At the same time, American companies, journalists, diplomats, and even civil society have all suffered unequal access in China.
The U.S. Ambassador Branstad did not have any excessive requests. He just asked for reciprocity. The American media should be treated the same way in China as how Chinese media are treated in the U.S. This is the reciprocity. His request is very simple. The CCP has been unwilling to reciprocate. It finds out various reasons, scolds the United States, and talks about all kinds of issues of the U.S. In fact, the United States is a free world.
Ambassador Branstad pointed out in the article that the root cause of the current tensions in the relationship is China's long-standing strategy of only selectively coupling with the United States and systematically controlling the access of Americans to Chinese society.
The CCP is afraid of the voice of the United States. It prevents the voice of the U.S. ambassador from being heard in China, which fully reflects that the CCP is actually a weak regime. This regime does not dare to let the voice of justice and different voices appear in China. It fears that the people will wake up and overthrow them.
Pompeo tweeted that the Chinese Communist Party complains about a lack of fair and reciprocal treatment with the U.S. At the same time, the CCP refused to run Ambassador Branstad's op-ed in the People's Daily, while their ambassador is free to publish in any U.S. media outlet. China's ambassador to the U.S., Chen Tiankai, has published 5 op-eds this year in the prominent U.S. news outlets, such as The Washington Post and Politico, and given exclusive interviews to the likes of CNN and CBS. China's foreign ministry and state-owned propaganda organs like the Global Times and China Daily regularly use free access to American social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook to attack our policies, our way of life, and the very system that protects their ability to speak freely.
The CCP's media is completely the mouthpiece of the CCP. Most of these media in China are government-funded. They themselves are the government staff. Their work is to promote the CCP, to create lies for the CCP, serving to stabilize the rule of the CCP. It is completely impossible to be equal.
Pompeo pointed out that the People's Daily's decision to refuse to run the op-ed by the U.S. ambassador in Beijing just proves the fact that Sino-U.S. relations are imbalanced and the CCP fears freedom of speech. It also shows how much China's unelected party elites fear their own people's free thinking and the free world's judgment about their governance practices inside China.
Pompeo's comments actually made it clearer that the United States has a better understanding of the CCP. The CCP has been very cunning, but an ambassador is enough to fully reveal its true color. All the cards have been revealed. When the CCP talks about dialogue and peace talks, will anyone believe it?
Lan Shu believes that the request for reciprocity is very reasonable.
The overseas edition of People's Daily was sent directly to the offices of all U.S. congressmen. In China, what about these U.S. newspapers? Will CCP allow the Epoch Times to be sent to thousands of households in China? It will not. In Hong Kong, it has to use various means to take the Epoch Times off the shelves from 7-Eleven convenience store. So these things the CCP did are not reciprocal.
Pompeo said in the end that if Communist China is sincere about becoming a mature power and strengthening relations with the free world, General Secretary Xi Jinping's government would respect the right for Western diplomats to speak directly to the Chinese people. allow foreign journalists back into China, and stop the intimidation and harassment of investigative journalists, foreign and Chinese.